Hello and welcome to the series on my channel where I recommend a wide range of things like books in different genres, fiction, non-fiction, manga, manhwa, anime, and dongwa, Asian dramas, K-pop content, and whatever else I add onto that list as time goes by. They are just going to be short mini clips that give you a summary of what I'm recommending, my review of it, and why I think you should try it. So today's recommendation is going to be more of a review slash discussion. It is a manga series titled Kaoru Hana Rintarou Saku, English translation, The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity by the mangaka Saka Mikami. So this is a title that I've been seeing going around a lot. The first time I ran into it, it was on a YouTube video that described it as, I believe it was like the most realistic romance manga I've ever read or something like that. And I didn't watch the video, but that title made me pay attention to it. And subsequent times when I ran into it on social media, like on Instagram and TikTok, I was able to just say oh, that was that series I saw in that YouTube video. So that just moved it from something that I saw every once in a while to being something I was more curious about. And I added it to my TBR probably sometime around March to eventually read when I got some free time to read it. And I did that last week. Honestly, this is a pretty quick read. If you give yourself about 3 to 4 hours of uninterrupted time, you can get through the series. I will warn you though that this is an ongoing series. So if you're not into reading ongoing stuff and prefer to wait for stuff to get completed, this is your chance to not bother reading it and just forget about it until it comes up another time when it's completed. But if you're into edging and waiting for new chapters of series to keep getting updated, definitely give this a try. So this is a romance manga that falls into the shonen, not shoujo demographic, because the main character is the male protagonist of the story, and the story kind of revolves around his growth as a character, how he was influenced by others, and vice versa. The romantic plot is described as a Romeo and Juliet inspired one because it takes place in a town with two schools that are in constant dispute with each other. So you have Chidori High, which is an all-boys school attended by people who are kind of perceived as low class and just bad at learning, by its neighboring school, Kikyo Girls High. And when I say neighboring, I'm not necessarily referring to the fact that these schools are located in the same town, but they are literally right next to each other. And you can immediately see the very clear disparity between both schools. Kikyo Girls High is an all-girls school that's predominantly attended by children from wealthy and prestigious families. And as for the dispute between both schools, there is a panel in the manga that very clearly shows the disputes between both schools. So students from both schools are kind of walking past each other. One of the girls drops her handkerchief. The guy from the Chidori High tries to pick it up and hand it to her. He's being a gentleman, and she just tells him oh, don't worry about it. What makes you think I'm going to use a handkerchief that you've touched or something like that? It was pretty bad. But for the remaining summary of the story, I'm just kind of going to take you through some panels from the first chapter of the series. These are kind of spoiler free. It's just to give you an introduction to the series. And I won't be going past the very first chapter because that's enough to kind of set the scene for the series. So going back to our main character in this manga, his name is Tsumugi Rintarou. He's kind of introduced as this scary, mean-looking character. He's tall, he has a scary-looking face, blonde hair, piercings, he wears earrings and everything. So he's your Japanese version of a gangster, and people are mad scared of him. But his father is a patissier, and his family owns a cake shop that he sometimes helps out at. So at the beginning of the story, he goes home because he has to help out his parents at the cake shop. So he gets home, his mom is oh, we're short-staffed in the kitchen, if you just help out for a while. We don't really have a lot of customers in the shop, but there's one person there. So he gets changed, tries to start helping out at the cake shop, and he notices that it's very quiet. He doesn't really see anyone in the cake shop, and he's thinking to himself oh, I thought mom said there was someone in the shop. So he turns the corner and we see our female protagonist, Waguri Kaoru, and this girl is just going in on all types of cake. She has 5 plates in front of her. She's mid-chew, she looks up, their eyes meet, and she is startled and starts choking on the bite that she just took. He's really startled, so he tries to give her a cup of water, I'm sorry for scaring you and everything, but she's so embarrassed that she just kind of runs out of the shop. So he's worried that he has kind of made business bad for his mom. So he tells her what happened and is well, I wouldn't worry about it. She's not that type of person. She's going to be back. And true to what his mom said, Kaoru comes back the next day and she apologizes for kind of just dashing out of the store, like, I'm sorry I reacted the way I did yesterday, and to kind of make it up for you, let me treat you to some cake from your parents' shop. I know, but yeah, she treats him to some cake. They sit down to talk and he notices that she's just kind of drooling after the cake she bought him, so he gives it back to her. They start talking to each other and they introduce themselves to each other, and after he says his name, she says something like, oh, I finally found out. And he's like, wait, that's kind of a weird thing for her to say. So he asked her, like, what do you mean by that? And she's like, oh, this is not the first time I'm meeting you, like, I've been seeing you working around the shop. And he's just like, well, if that wasn't your first time meeting me, why did you react that way yesterday? And she's like, oh, please don't misunderstand me. I wasn't scared of you or anything. I was just really startled and embarrassed. And also, I've never like really been subjected to a guy looking at me that intently. So it just made me really embarrassed and my heart got all fluttery. They're very open and honest people. Both of them start blushing and they kind of end the night with her saying like, oh, like, I've never really been scared of you, which is a very important thing to Rintarou because he's introduced as this scary character, and like that's one of the main things that people really say about him. So someone telling him, I don't see you as a scary person, is a very important aspect to the plot. But they both part ways. He goes back into the store and then his mom tells him like, oh, Waguri-san left the cake that she bought. So he picks it up and tries to go give it back to her. He runs into her being bullied by these guys who are kind of just mouthing off at her. I'm not going to go over everything that happens there, but he basically helps her out. They get to talking with each other again and they end the night and part on better terms than their first meeting, at least on Rintarou's part the day before. So the very next day they both go to their respective schools. Rintarou sits by the window so he has like a view to the very next school, which is Kikyo Girls High, but the curtain is always drawn, so he's looking out the window through his seat and he notices that the curtain at Kikyo High is like fluttering a little bit. He's like, oh well, that curtain is always closed, but is someone actually going to open it today? So it opens up and who else is on the other side than Kaoru. So that's where the first chapter ends. The both of them realize that they go to the disputing high schools, with Rintarou going to Chidori High and Kaoru being a girl that goes to Kikyo High. So that's where the first chapter ends and kind of gives you like a very good introduction into the series. But basically the rest of the series just kind of goes into their relationship with each other developing while still trying to hide that relationship from the respective members or friends that they have in their school. So Rintarou from his friends at Chidori and Kaoru from her friends at Kikyo High, and basically just how they navigate that relationship. There are parts of this story that feel overly dramatic, like we do not know what was the start of the disputes, like nobody really talks about it. And the more you read the story, you see that the dispute is something that's more sold heavily on one side, the one side being the Kikyo Girls High side of things. On Chidori High, they don't really care about it. They're kind of carefree people, but they kind of just stuck to the dispute because they're like, well, if that's how they feel about us, I'm not necessarily going to try to change their minds. Even on the Kikyo Girls High part, the students are kind of victims because the teachers at the school are kind of the ones that kind of force it on them, like, oh, if you interact with the guys from that school, your life is going to be destroyed and nothing good is going to come out of it, kind of like that. And if that's information that you've been fed pretty consistently, you start to believe it and you just start to look down on the people who you've been told are kind of less than you. That's definitely where the story is coming from, but we get introduced to like a lot more characters in the story. So basically Kaoru's friends and Rintarou's friends, like there's no way they're going to be able to keep this hidden forever. Some of their friends eventually find out. A lot of them have like very overly dramatic come to Jesus moments where they basically have a character change and see the wrong of their ways. They all become friends and everything. And I guess the really enjoyable part of this series is how mature the characters are. They have like a very mature way of addressing disputes between each other and misunderstandings as well. They're not overly dragged out. They're very open and honest with each other. So I really enjoyed that part of the story. I wouldn't go as far as saying like it's the most realistic manga I've ever read or anything, or like it's a 10 out of 10 stars, I'll rate it like an 8 out of 10 at most. It was an enjoyable read. Like there was no part of when I was reading the story where I was like, this is the most stupid shit I've ever read. I'm not reading this anymore. No, I actually really enjoyed reading it. And every chapter I read, I was actually anticipating what was coming next. And when I got to the final chapter that's been updated, I was like, oh dang, I actually wanted to keep reading this. So it's an enjoyable read in that sense. And it's just really refreshing to read about like really mature characters. Like Rintarou is a very mature character, and he has dealt with a lot of insecurity. Like you see a lot of growth in his storyline as a person in the series. And even like Kaoru, she's very mature, and one thing that stands out about her is although she goes to Kikyo High, she is not from a super rich or prestigious family. She actually got into the school on a scholarship, and the reason why that sets her apart from all the other people who go to the school is she is a very free-spirited and kind of like an open-minded character. So everything they're selling to them in that school, like, oh, like do not interact with these boys, she basically doesn't buy into it. And at the beginning of the story, when they first found out that they go to the opposing schools, Rintarou tried to start avoiding her because it's like, oh, I don't want to get her into trouble. But this girl was like, you know what? Like, I know what I want. I'm not going to stop talking to you just because you go to this school. Like, that's a load of BS. I'm going to do what I want based on what you've shown me. I think you're a pretty good person. That's what I see, and that's what I'm going to act based on. So that part of the story is very refreshing, and I can see why people will enjoy reading about characters like that. A lot of them are very relatable. They make you kind of root for them and their growth as characters. A lot of that is what plays into making the series an enjoyable read. And honestly, I'm just kind of rooting for every single one of them. I know they're eventually going to run into more problematic characters in the story that don't necessarily buy into resolving misunderstandings the way things have been resolved so far, because there's still this really big dispute between both schools, and they are basically hanging out with each other in a very small circle of friends. I'm guessing we're going to get to a part in the story where it's like this big blown up thing that everyone knows about, and it's going to become a big deal. And I really want to see how it's going to be handled when that happens. But until then, that was kind of my recommendation, review, and discussion for the series. I hope you enjoyed watching it and you've been able to add one more title to your TBR, or maybe you're even planning to go read it right now, whichever one works for you. I will see you in my next video, and whatever day you find yourself watching this, make it a great one. Bye.